For your LCD digitizer, this is probably the most common repair that we do. And what happens, you drop it, you break the glass, and obviously the touch probably won't work, or you don't want to use it with the glass broken. The other thing that can happen is if you drop it, you can actually cause the LCD to go black or white. Now, if you dropped it and the touch just stopped working, or the LCD went black, then you'll want to check these plugs. And I'll show you here on the board, on the close-up, that your LCD plugs are right there and right there. LCD and digitizer. So you'll want to make sure that you check these two plugs on the board first if the touch has stopped working or the LCD has gone black or white. Just make sure they're completely plugged in. If they are plugged in, then we'll show you how to replace the LCD digitizer assembly. The one thing you want to be careful of is if your glass is broken, that you wear some type of gloves. The glass is sharp and it will cut you. So wear gloves, and then I also recommend to wear some sort of eye protection glasses or something, just in case you start to take the unit off and a piece of glass flies off. It can hit you in the face. So take that as a precaution, and then once you do that, we'll get started. So we're gonna have 4 screws actually in the corners that hold the frame on. So we have a screw right here, a screw right down in there, a screw right there, and one more screw right in that corner. Now the other thing we have here is we have 6 screws with washers. So we have one right here, we have one right here, one right there, and then 3 on the other side. We have 1, 2, and 3. So we'll start by removing the 4 screws in the corners. It's easiest to use if you have a longer and skinnier screwdriver. You can get down inside this corner without having to remove the headset jack. So if you can kind of get in there just to loosen that screw up without having to do any extra work, it'll just save you some time in the long run. And then we'll take this screw out as well. Be sure that when you go in there to actually take the screw out, that you're not at some kind of crazy angle, because if you're higher up, you can actually strip the screw head out. So as long as you get down in kind of a more flat surface, you should be able to get right in there to remove that. And same with these, we'll just do the same thing down here, and then the same thing over here. Now once we get those out, we'll want to remove the 6 screws with washers, but we're not going to actually remove them. We're just going to back them off maybe a turn or so, maybe a turn and a half. You don't want to go too much. You just want enough to where you can actually loosen the space between part of the frame for the LCD digitizer assembly and the screw itself holding it in place, or the washer. Okay, and once we get those out, the next thing we'll do is use our guitar pick. And what I like to do is kind of start in the middle. It's probably the easiest part to start the separation. And we're just going to get in between the frame of the phone, or the housing, and the frame, the little black or white plastic frame of the LCD digitizer. So what we'll do, I usually just give it a little bit of a pressure, and you see how I kind of separated it. It may be harder for you, just depends, but if you just give it enough pressure, you should be able to separate that, and then just kind of work the pick along the edge, and as you're kind of going around, you'll be able to just separate it. Now when you get to the top, I usually start at the bottom first, so start at the bottom. When you get to the top, you want to be careful of these cables right here. If you're, maybe you're doing a different repair like the home key, you don't want to, damage these cables at all. So when you go to separate this, you just want to make sure that you slide these cables safely through. They are pretty thin, and if you catch it, on this opening right here, you can actually damage it. So just make sure that when you separate it, that that you're careful about those cables. Now, there's a couple of things. If you're doing, say, the speaker repair, and I'll cover this in the speaker repair, but what happens sometimes is this this opening right here, and I can show you that on the close-up here, is the opening within the dust cover. Right there is where your speaker, the actual sound comes out. You can get dirt and dust buildup in there. And this speaker, that little speaker cover inside of the assembly right here, can get built up with dirt and dust. So what you'll want to do is try to clean that out as good as possible, and that could resolve some issues you have with the speaker, maybe if you can't hear it all. The other thing we're going to remove is this home key right here. It's actually stuck on the back of the assembly, versus the 3G, 3GS, 4. They're all separate and actually on the frame, but this is on the back of the assembly, so we're going to remove that as well. And then these little spacers as well, we're going to remove these to put on the new LCD and the new digitizer. So we'll prep the board right now to get ready for the new part. So one thing that does happen, if you break the glass on here, you're going to have pieces of glass probably all over either the top, maybe the bottom, maybe both, maybe on the actual, this little LCD housing right here. And you want to make sure that you get every piece of glass off. If you have just a piece of glass on here and you go to put the new LCD digitizer unit on, you can actually break the new unit or scratch the glass, because if an old piece of glass is sitting here and you press it together, you can actually break it, and then you have to replace it again. So take the time up front to make sure that you get all of the old adhesive and all of the old glass off. Even if I haven't broken anything, I'll typically try to remove the adhesive just to start with kind of a clean slate, so to speak. Because it doesn't hurt. Once you take all this off, it can kind of compromise the the stickiness of the adhesive, and maybe your screen comes up, or something doesn't sit properly because the adhesive isn't new. So I just like to start over with everything brand new. So we get the top off. We'll kind of work the bottom here. And again, excuse me. And again, bear with it if it's kind of, you struggle with it a little bit, because they're really meant to stick on the board, so it'll take you a couple of minutes to get it off. But once you get it off, you start with the new clean slate, you're good to go. So now that we have that off, we'll get the new strips of adhesive. These you should get at least 1 and 1 with your new assembly. If you don't get them, you can order them. They probably only cost you maybe not even $1 or a couple bucks online, and it really saves time than trying to cut maybe a new, just a huge big sheet, and you're trying to cut and make everything fit into place. Just kind of, it's easier to be able to peel it and kind of go from there. So when we line everything up, there'll be a couple of spots that have cutouts that are for, maybe a cable or a sensor or something. So you want to make sure on the top here that you get that cutout right there and just, peel it off, set it aside. If you get the right adhesive, it should fit, perfectly around the openings and the cables and whatnot. And same thing with the bottom. Get that down there. And then there should be 2 cutouts down here as well. Now when you're going to remove these cutouts, just be careful that you don't damage the cable underneath, because there's those little openings that we have for the charging cable, and if you maybe gouge it too deep, you can definitely damage that. Now the one thing I do, we're going to need to put a new dust cover on there. You can use the old dust cover if you didn't get one, with the new assembly. So you can peel that off and put it on here. If you did get a new dust cover, it may have, some stickiness to it, but what I'll usually do is grab one of these little extra pieces of adhesive and just lay it on that part of that opening right there, but I won't cover the actual opening. I'll stick it right to the side. And then here's the new dust covers. And it may come in a pack of 3. The other 2 dust covers will be for the bottom of the phone. They'll be actually for down here. But you typically don't need to replace those. So what I'll do is I usually lay its shiny side up. So when you look in through it from the top of the phone, it's nice and shiny, looks brand new. So there's that, and then we'll put this last little piece on, and this doesn't have any opening, so you should be okay with that. Now what we'll do, before we actually peel that off, we'll just we'll remove the actual key. What I'll do is I'll use my finger and just press in the middle of it to kind of give it some pressure and to lift it. So that way when I just go to peel the side of it, I'm able just to kind of not work too much, but be able to lift it and then get right under there and just peel it out. Now there is adhesive on that side. See how it's kind of sticking to my finger? So that's nice, because you should just be able to transfer it to the new one, keeping in mind that you want to keep this key as straight as possible for when you put it in, because you don't want to put it in and have this key kind of at an angle. You want it to be straight. So when you, let's get that all straightened out. And if you're trying to adjust that or peel it up, just be careful, because this is kind of painted, and if you scratch it, it'll show through on the other side. So what you want to make sure is that your key lines up nice and straight, which ours does. You don't want this little square to be at an angle. If it's kind of sticking at a 45-degree angle, it just won't look right. So you want to make sure that that's as straight as possible. If it's off, just adjust that. You can kind of move it back and forth. And then once you get it right, just press it down and make sure that it's good to go. Now we'll peel this backing off. You may have a blue backing or a red backing or a clear backing, but you can peel that off and just set that aside. We'll then peel the adhesive off, or the backing for the adhesive. And this again may take a little bit of time. If you're having problems with it, you can just kind of press everything down, make sure it sticks, and then when you go to get in there, just make sure you're peeling the backing off. And that should all come off fairly easy. Once you have the backing off, just be careful not to touch it too much because you don't want to compromise the actual adhesive itself. So we should be ready now to put everything back together. So here's our new LCD. We have the home key in there. We have all the adhesive, the dust cover, so we should be good to go. Now what we'll do with the cables is as we start to put them in, and I'll show you here on the close-up, that you want to be careful of this little piece right here as you're putting the cable back in. You don't want this little flap to get caught, because what will happen if it catches, it can actually crease this cable and cause the cable to possibly not work. So when we're putting it in, we're just going to mind that little fold in the cable, and as we kind of get closer, we can just as we get closer, we'll just push that cable kind of down and then slowly slide in. So if we go to the back side, we should be able to see that cable coming through, and if we can see it coming through, then we should be good. Now another thing that might happen is you have the adhesive running right down onto here, basically running right there. So that adhesive may kind of stick to this cable as you're trying to, slide it through. The cable may touch the top of this opening, and it may stick a little bit on that adhesive. If it happens, you can either just push it up a little bit, or just being careful, kind of work it and wiggle it in, and you should be able to get that through. Now, since we left these washers and screws in here, what we're going to have to do is try to get the frame, this little horseshoe piece right here, all these 6 little pieces that we slid out, we're going to have to get these in between the washer and the frame. So what I'll typically do, as long as I know that this is in right here and that I'm good on this cable, I'll start on one side and just kind of slowly work the frame in, meanwhile trying to keep these washers down and the frame itself in between that. So I got one side now, so I'll show you on the close-up again. One side is good to go. So we have, you can see here, that little horseshoe piece, the part of the assembly for the LCD, is in between this washer and the frame. Same with this, and same with this. So once we get that side, we'll need to do the same with this side. That one, and that one. So we'll go back to the overhead and I'll finish that. So once we know that this side is in, I'll typically try to hold it with my thumb just to make sure that it doesn't move and then it falls back out and I have to redo it. So I'll try to hold that and kind of pinch it in place with my thumb, and then as this side starts to go in, I'll just slowly work those little guides in again like I did the other side. Now if you're having problems with this not lining up right, you may need to just kind of pop these little, you can pop these little frames in, or even these corner pieces will sometimes kind of get hung up and it may not go in how it should. But if you just give it a little bit of a pressure on the sides, it should eventually line up. And then once you get those close enough, you should be able to just kind of work it back and forth and then slowly slide that in place. So we'll check that side as well, and I'll show you that that side should be the same as the other side. It should, so all these pieces, that one right there, that one right there, and that right there, are all in between the washer and the actual frame of the phone. So once we get those in, I'll check the home key just to make sure that it does recoil and that it's lined up properly. What can happen sometimes if this key isn't in all the way, maybe it pushes in but then it doesn't recoil back. So just make sure that works, and then make sure the frame lines up. If it's got a little bit of a gap, that should be okay, because when you go to tighten it down, it should sit nice and flush. But just make sure that it's together, and that nothing is sticking up too much, which it is. Okay, we're good. And then we'll tighten these 6 screws down with the washers again. The way I'll do it is I'll just kind of hold the corner right here. I don't want to push too much in the middle or at all. If you're kind of pushing like that, you can actually crack the glass. So we'll just keep it kind of a tight pressure in the corner as we're tightening these screws up. And what will happen is once we tighten them up, that frame sits nice and flat, whereas before there was a little bit of a gap. And again, you don't want to over tighten these screws. Hand tight. Once you feel it tighten down, you can stop. It doesn't take much to tighten them up. And then we'll do these 4 screws down here, all in the corner. We have that screw, and this is probably the hardest or trickiest screw to get in, but again, if you have this kind of low profile screwdriver, it should line up properly. So make sure everything lines up how it should, which it all does. It's all nice and flush with the frame. The home key recoils. The dust cover is in there, so that looks nice and shiny. And everything lined up properly. So that should take care of either your digitizer or your LCD issues.